So how exactly do you steer a massive ship of state in a totally new direction? That was a big question facing the Obama administration, as it inherited some huge, long-standing problems. And their answer? It was a deliberate and, yeah, often controversial break from the policies of the past. And that quote right there, it's not just some snappy political soundbite. It's really the core idea we're going to unpack today. It's this declaration that the old ways of thinking just weren't cutting it anymore for the problems of a new era, and it really drove some of the administration's most defining decisions. So, where did this new philosophy first get put to the test? Well, the first place we really see it in action is on the global stage, where the administration was aiming to completely recalibrate America's role. Let's dig into two key examples that really stand out. Okay, so first up, the long shadow of the war in Iraq. By the time 2009 rolled around, it had become this incredibly costly and divisive conflict. And the question hanging over Washington wasn't really if the U.S. would leave, but how? How do you get out without making an even bigger mess? The administration's solution was this really clear, methodical withdrawal. The new mission was, well, simple: end the war. But this wasn't some hasty retreat. It was a carefully planned disengagement. The plan was to pull out 1 to 2 combat brigades every month. The goal, as they put it, was to be as careful getting out of Iraq as we were careless getting in, leaving just a small residual force behind. And that brings us to Cuba, and a policy that was a complete 180-degree turn. For over half a century, the U.S. strategy was pretty simple: isolate the island nation. But the Obama administration basically came in and argued that this approach had failed on every single front. It hadn't helped the Cuban people, it had pushed away American allies, and, the same government was still in power. So the new course was radical: engage with Cuba, don't isolate it. Now, you have to understand, a policy shift this massive doesn't just happen with a single speech. It was the result of months of intense, often secret, diplomatic negotiations, a really high-stakes effort to dismantle decades of hostility and mistrust, piece by piece. And you can literally see the results of those negotiations play out, step by step. It all started with that historic announcement in December 2014. From there, the changes became real, tangible. The U.S. Embassy reopened, commercial flights started back up, and even direct mail service was restored after a 50-year freeze. And all of that, it all culminated in this one incredibly powerful image: a sitting American president on Cuban soil for the first time in nearly a century. This was the symbolic payoff for a really risky and dramatic policy reversal. But this philosophy of charting a new course wasn't just for foreign affairs. Oh no! The administration turned that same critical eye inward, applying it to one of America's most deeply entrenched domestic problems: mass incarceration. I mean, the scale of the problem is just staggering. Think about this. The U.S. has less than 5% of the world's population, but we hold nearly a quarter of its prisoners. So the big question is, how on earth did the system get to this point? Well, a big part of the answer lies in cases like Sharanda Jones's. She was a first-time, nonviolent drug offender who got a mandatory life sentence. Her story became this powerful example of how rigid, tough-on-crime sentencing laws, especially from the 80s and 90s, had led to what many people saw as deeply unjust outcomes. So to address these kinds of cases directly, the president turned to a very specific tool in his executive toolbox: clemency. This basically allows the president to commute or shorten federal sentences that are seen as way too harsh. It's a direct way to correct past sentences without having to pass a whole new law through Congress. And wow, did President Obama use this power. He used it far more aggressively than his recent predecessors. I mean, by late 2015, he had already granted nearly double the number of commutations as the previous 4 presidents combined. And he was really focused on nonviolent drug offenders who'd been hit with those severe mandatory sentences. All right, so with such massive shifts in policy, both abroad and at home, how did the public respond? What was the final verdict on all of this change? What's pretty interesting is that deep into his second term, his approval ratings actually started a steady climb. Analysts point to a few things coming together. The economy was finally showing real signs of life. His hesitance about new ground wars really connected with the war-weary public, and there was this sense that, for better or worse, he was owning his policies. But, and this is a big but, that is not the whole story. The same policies that won praise also drew some really sharp criticism. His approval among active duty military personnel, for example, was incredibly low, just 15%. And the very same executive power he used for clemency was attacked as nakedly hypocritical, leading to this perception that he had lost the confidence of the military he commanded. Which leaves us with this fundamental question, right? And it's not just for this presidency, but for any leader. From ending a war to rethinking justice, this administration's legacy is a masterclass in breaking from the past. But it forces us all to confront a core dilemma. How do you balance the huge risks of charting a new course against the hidden and maybe even greater costs of just staying put?